writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. May the 4th be with you, and today's topic we're going to be answering the question, is Star Wars in fact science fiction, or is it something else entirely different? So stay tuned for this week's episode. Let's head into the storm, or more appropriately, let's head into the asteroid field.
Okay, right.
At first glance, Star Wars appears like it hits all the notes for science fiction. Of course, you have spaceships, you have intergalactic empires, you have Jedi Knights, you have lightsabers, you have strange technology, you have alien creatures. And yes, a lot of notes of science fiction are in Star Wars, but is the plot sci-fi? Is the plot actually just a fantasy story in a science fiction setting? One of the ways to think about science fiction is a great quote from one of my favorite authors, David Eddings, and he stated that if the general population is optimistic, science fiction is going to be the most popular genre. And then he also stated that if the general population's view is pessimistic, fantasy fiction is going to be the more popular genre of that time. And so what he's saying is that science fiction is a look to the future. It's a look to how great things are going to become, to beyond the horizon, a look to the future, a look to budding and emerging technologies, whereas fantasy fiction is more looking at the past. It's looking at how things once were with a magical kind of element to them. And I firmly believe that Star Wars, especially as a plot, is much more aligned with that of fantasy fiction than that of actual science fiction. If we consider even the opening crawl, if we consider even just the opening statement of Star Wars, which is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So immediately we're jumped into a world that's a long time ago, and that aligns much more with that of fantasy fiction, in the sense of typical Western fantasy fiction is set within a medieval realm. Not always, but a lot of fantasy fiction, at least popularized fantasy fiction, is set within a medieval Western European kind of setting, kind of backdrop. And so we see this very much in a lot of Star Wars. A lot of some of the elements of fantasy fiction are very much alive and well within Star Wars. But does this actually mean that Star Wars itself is not science fiction, or is it just that the plot is more aligned with fantasy fiction? That's what we're trying to look at. So again, considering David Eddings' view of what science fiction means and what fantasy fiction means, and how that is reflected within the general population's view of how life is going, about how the future might look, about how things in the past might have been. Very much considering that definition that Eddings gives us, with him defining that science fiction is a look to the future and fantasy fiction is a look to the past. I believe that Star Wars, from a plot perspective, very much is fantasy fiction. You have characters like Jedi Knights who can very much easily be seen as a modernized version of Men-at-Arms, or modernized version of Paladins, or whatever you have, considering maybe perhaps Aragon as the king. And we even have, and I'm going to be totally honest here, I have only ever really cared about the original 3 Star Wars films. For episodes 4, 5, 6, I don't care much for 7, 8, 9. I have seen 1, 2, and 3, but I have not seen them all. But this is just my perspective on the story at large, and very much so, to me, it comes across as a fantasy fiction story where you have a chosen character. You even have a prophecy within, and prophecies very much come into play with a lot of fantasy fiction has prophecies. They have the chosen one, and we see that within the plot, within the storyline of Star Wars. We have the Chosen One who becomes corrupt. We have the Empire that has this growing evil, which the Empire there are so many similarities that can be drawn between the Empire and that of the growing power of Mordor from the Lord of the Rings. And I'm going to be relying a lot on the Lord of the Rings as it is one of the most popular examples of fantasy fiction to draw from. And again, we're analyzing Star Wars from the perspective of its plot, analyzing it from its depiction of its setting, of the story, and I firmly believe that Star Wars is much more aligned with that of fantasy fiction than that of a traditional science fiction story. So what does that mean? What would a traditional science fiction story mean? Well, we certainly have a lot of the science fiction tropes in Star Wars. We have strange technologies, strange worlds with their own unique biomes. We have characters who are alien-like. We have characters that are cute and cuddly, that's going to be a lot more aligned with that of fantasy fiction. If we think of fantasy fiction such as The Chronicles of Prydain by Alexander Lloyd, we have a lot of scruffy-looking characters. We have animal-like characters who are capable of speech, animal-like characters who are basically characters within their own right. We have cute, cuddly characters, and we see that a lot more in traditional fantasy fiction. So Star Wars, from my perspective, does a great job of bridging that gap between that of hardcore traditional science fiction and that of hardcore traditional epic fantasy, because in Star Wars we very much have a science fiction setting. We have space, and that's very much sci-fi in a nutshell. Sci-fi doesn't always have to take place in outer space. Sci-fi is perfectly capable of happening on planet Earth. It's perfectly capable of happening on a different planet. Doesn't have to mean that there's space travel. Doesn't have to mean that there's light speed. Doesn't have to mean that there's even spaceships mentioned at all. A great example of this would be the work of Ray Bradbury. A lot of his science fiction might seem very commonplace, but it's focused around technology. It's focused around human beings and their interaction on strange worlds, on distant planets that have already become colonized, such as All Summer and a Day, where you have a school that's set on the planet Venus, and that's very much sci-fi. It's that speculative genre of asking the question of what if mankind colonized Venus? What if mankind was capable of colonizing and landing on Mars? What if mankind explored space? And seeing the ramifications for that is what is so interesting about science fiction. Again, science fiction is very much looking to the future. It's looking to how great technology is going to be in the distant future. So again, I'm not saying that Wars is not sci-fi, but I believe there's a strong case for arguing that the plot of Star Wars is much more aligned with that of fantasy fiction, where you have a chosen one, you have a prophecy, you have these pseudo knights in armor, well, as you might have, you have sort of a magic system even within that of the Force that allows characters to tap into this strange power and this strange gift that within this universe there are a select few who are capable of this act. And we see in many fantasy stories, we see a lot of the same tropes and a lot of the same plot points. We even have, at least in the original trilogy, we have Princess Leia, and very much Star Wars starts off as that idea of go and rescue the princess, which is a very traditional storyline plot structure for that of traditional fantasy fiction stories, especially within the video game setting. It's always go save the princess. Oh, your princess is in a different castle. And so very much this is the plot of Star Wars in my mind. It's very much akin to that of fantasy fiction, within a backdrop, which is sci-fi with spaceships and all this advanced technology. But again, the opening line of time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And so that to me suggests that the plot is trying to grab on to that of traditional fantasy fiction, and with the backdrop of space, with the backdrop of science fiction, and having all these science fiction tropes within it, and all these cool sort of modernized takes on that of knights in armor, modernized takes of wizards and magicians with their force powers, with what's later their force lightning. And we see the prophecy, we see the chosen one, and how there's this growing empire, this growing evil within the world, which is very traditional of fantasy fiction, going all the way back to Tolkien's work, where you have this rising darkness in the powers of Mordor, and they're searching for something, just as the Empire in the very beginning of A New Hope. The Empire is searching for something. The Empire is searching for the plans that have been stolen. And again, this is very much aligned with that of traditional fantasy fiction. So I firmly believe that Star Wars is a fantasy fiction story within a science fiction backdrop. And so that's the case that I'm making. I want to wish everyone a very happy May 4th. So May the 4th be with you. And if you like this content, make sure to hit like, subscribe, make sure to comment below, give me a thumbs up. I very much enjoy interacting and seeing your comments. I very much enjoy seeing this channel grow. I'm again doing the best I can to make each video a little bit better, and I'm trying to put out videos around special events. I do keep to a traditional publishing schedule of every Monday. So again, make sure to hit like, subscribe, maybe ring that notification bell, leave a comment below, let me know, do you think Star Wars is traditional science fiction, or is it traditional, or is the plot all within sci-fi? Because again, I feel that a lot of the realms that we see, especially with the Ewoks are very much sort of fantasy fiction-like in their design. And yes, you do have aliens within this world, but you have like the Council of the Jedi Masters, the Council. It could be likened to that of the Council of Elrond and the elves and the high power that is within the Lord of the Rings universe. So again, we see a lot of drawing from that of fantasy fiction within the Star Wars plot, within how these characters are created, within the way that their motivation goes throughout the story, and the corruption that occurs. Again, it's a very interesting story to analyze. And with that said, thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep it spooky. So this week's writing prompt is going to be, I followed the old man to the edge of the ravine. I looked out, and there I saw blank. So again, set your timer for however long you've been doing it for the past few weeks. And again, the goal with this is to write nonstop, is to just turn off that critical brain and just write for your set timer. And with that said, thank you so much again for watching. Keep it spooky.